You've been told bread is bad for you, that it spikes your blood sugar, causes inflammation, that gluten is the enemy. Maybe you've cut it out entirely, or you feel guilty every time you eat it. But here's what doesn't make sense. Bread fed entire civilizations for thousands of years. It wasn't a treat, it wasn't occasional, it was survival. And the people who ate it, massive quantities of it, didn't suffer from diabetes, autoimmune diseases, or gluten sensitivity. So either human biology fundamentally changed in the last century, or something happened to the bread itself. Let's find out which one it is. Bread wasn't called the staff of life as a metaphor. It was literal. Across medieval Europe, bread made up 70 to 80% of daily caloric intake, not because people loved carbs, because it was the most efficient way to survive. Take York, England, in 1324. Records show that a working man consumed between 2 and 3 pounds of bread every single day. Not white, fluffy sandwich bread. Dense, dark loaves made from rye, barley, or wheat, chewy, heavy, filling. You might think that's excessive, but consider what his day looked like. He woke before dawn, no heating, no insulation. He worked outside, plowing fields, hauling stone, cutting timber for 10 to 12 hours. His body burned between 3,500 and 4,500 calories a day. Bread provided the fuel. It was cheap, portable, and stored well. Meat was rare. Vegetables were seasonal. Bread was constant. And here's the part that should make you pause. He wasn't sick from it. There are no medieval records of widespread gluten intolerance, no diabetes epidemics, no autoimmune disorders linked to bread consumption. These people ate more bread in a week than most modern adults eat in a month, and their bodies handled it fine. You can see this in the skeletal evidence. Medieval bones show signs of hard labor, injury, and infection, but they don't show the metabolic dysfunction we see today. No insulin resistance, no chronic inflammation markers tied to diet. Bread sustains them. It built cathedrals, it fueled armies, it carried civilizations through famine and war. So what changed? Your grandfather probably ate bread without issue, maybe your great-grandfather too. But somewhere between their generation and yours, something shifted. Bread went from nourishment to threat. The food that powered human endurance for millennia suddenly started making people sick. The standard explanation is that we're more aware now, that we have better diagnostics, that gluten sensitivity was always there, just unrecognized. But that doesn't explain the scale. Celiac disease has quadrupled since the 1950s. Gluten sensitivity is now estimated to affect 6 to 10% of the population. Metabolic syndrome, driven in part by refined carbohydrates, affects nearly 1 in 3 American adults. These aren't small numbers, and they didn't exist at this level a century ago. So let's be clear about what we're comparing. Medieval bread was made from 3 ingredients: flour, water, and salt, sometimes a natural starter culture for leavening. That's it. The wheat was grown without synthetic pesticides. It was milled on stone, slowly, preserving the bran and germ. The dough was fermented for 12 to 24 hours, breaking down proteins and starches into forms the human gut could digest. The result was bread that released energy slowly, that didn't spike blood sugar, that didn't trigger immune reactions in healthy people. It wasn't perfect, it could mold, it could go stale, but it was food, real, recognizable food. And the people who ate it survived, thrived even, under conditions that would break most of us today. This isn't about romanticizing the past. Medieval life was brutal. Most people died young. Disease was rampant. But the bread itself, it worked. It gave them the calories they needed without destroying their metabolic health. It was simple, effective, and aligned with human biology in a way that modern bread simply isn't. Which brings us to the question you should be asking now. If bread worked for so long, what happened to it? Because something did. And understanding that shift, what changed, when, and why, is the only way to make sense of why bread has become the villain in your diet. The answer isn't in your body, It's in the loaf. Pick up a loaf of bread from your supermarket shelf. Turn it over. Read the ingredients. You'll see somewhere between 15 and 30 items listed. Enriched flour, high fructose corn syrup, soybean oil, monoglycerides, calcium propionate, azodicarbonamide, datum, sodium stearoyl lactylate. Now ask yourself, why does bread need chemistry? Medieval bread had 3 ingredients: flour, water, salt, sometimes a natural starter. That's it. Modern bread is a different species entirely. It's not that we've improved the recipe, we've replaced it. What you're holding isn't bread in any historical sense. It's an engineered product designed to survive distribution, maximize profit, and meet industrial demands that have nothing to do with nourishment. Let's break down what actually happened. Start with the flour. You'll see enriched on most labels. That sounds like enhancement. It's not. It's damage control. Enriched flour starts as whole grain, then it's stripped. The bran is removed, the germ is removed, the oils, the fiber, the minerals, gone. What's left is pure white starch. Why? Because white flour has a longer shelf life. Whole grain flour contains oils that go rancid. Manufacturers don't want rancid flour, so they remove the parts that spoil. Then they chemically bleach what remains to make it look clean and pure. But now the flour is nutritionally dead. So they add back a handful of synthetic vitamins, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, folic acid, and call it enriched. You didn't get an upgrade, you got a product that was gutted and then barely patched. Next, the preservatives. Bread used to go stale in a day or two. That was normal. It meant the bread was alive, fermented by bacteria, exposed to air, made from real ingredients that decompose. Modern bread lasts 2 weeks on a shelf. Some brands last a month. That's not better bread. That's better embalming. Calcium propionate prevents mold. Sodium benzoate extends shelf life. Sorbic acid stops spoilage. These chemicals don't exist to nourish you. They exist so bread can survive long-distance shipping, sit in warehouses, and remain soft for weeks without refrigeration. You're not eating fresh food. You're eating logistically optimized starch. Then there's texture. Modern bread is soft, pillowy. It compresses in your hand and springs back. You can roll it into a ball. Medieval bread wasn't like that. It was dense, chewy. It had structure because it was made from whole grain and fermented slowly. To get that modern softness, manufacturers add dough conditioners. Datum and monoglycerides make the texture uniform. They trap air. They create that cloud-like feel. Azodicarbonamide, yes, the same chemical used in yoga mats and shoe soles, bleaches the dough and improves elasticity. None of this makes bread more nutritious. It makes it more marketable. Soft sells, longevity sells, uniformity sells. Here's the summary. Modern bread is designed for 3 things: low production cost, long shelf life, and consumer appeal. It's not designed to fuel your body. It's designed to move through a supply chain and sit on a shelf until someone buys it. The ingredients aren't there because they improve the food. They're there because they improve the product. And that's the shift. Bread stopped being food. It became a packaged good, a manufactured item, a thing produced at scale with profit margins and distribution logistics as the priority. You might argue that this makes bread more accessible, and in one sense it does. Modern bread is cheap. It's everywhere. It doesn't spoil quickly. But accessibility isn't the same as nourishment. What good is cheap bread if it makes you hungrier an hour later? If it spikes your blood sugar and crashes it just as fast? If it contains residues of chemicals your great-grandfather wouldn't recognize as food? Medieval people didn't have preservatives or dough conditioners. They had flour, water, salt, and time. And somehow, that was enough to sustain entire populations through physical labor that would hospitalize most of us today. So when did this happen? The shift began in earnest after World War II. Industrial food production exploded. Factories that had been making rations for soldiers retooled for civilian markets. Speed and scale became the standard. By the 1960s, the small bakeries that had made bread locally for centuries were being replaced by industrial plants. Bread that used to be mixed, shaped, and baked by hand was now made on assembly lines by machines. And the priority wasn't taste or nutrition, it was efficiency. Bread that could be made in 2 hours instead of 24. Bread that could survive a cross-country truck route. Bread that could undercut every competitor on price. The old methods, stone milling, long fermentation, whole grain integrity, were abandoned, not because they didn't work, because they didn't scale. This is the part that should bother you. Nobody asked if this was better for human health. The question was whether it was better for business. And the answer was yes, wildly profitably yes. But your body doesn't run on profit margins. It runs on chemistry, on nutrients, on food that it recognizes and can process. Modern bread isn't that. It's a substitute, a stand-in, an industrial approximation of something that used to be simple and effective. So the next question is obvious. If the bread changed this much, what happened to the wheat itself? Because it's not just the ingredients, it's not just the process. The crop, the actual plant we're growing and grinding into flour, changed too. And that transformation might be even more fundamental than anything we've talked about so far. In 1970, Norman Borlaug won the Nobel Peace Prize. Not for ending a war, not for negotiating a treaty, for creating wheat that could feed the world. He's credited with saving over 1 billion lives. His semi-dwarf wheat varieties transformed agriculture across Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Yields doubled, sometimes tripled. Famine retreated. Populations grew. This is called the Green Revolution, and by almost any measure, it was a triumph. But there's something we didn't account for. When you change a plant to feed more people, you also change how that plant interacts with the human body. And wheat, our oldest, most essential crop, changed more than almost anything else we eat. Let's start with what Borlaug actually did. Traditional wheat was tall, 4 feet high, sometimes more. That height made it vulnerable. Strong wind or heavy rain could flatten entire fields. When wheat falls over before harvest, what farmers call lodging, the crop is lost. Borlaug's solution was to breed shorter wheat, semi-dwarf varieties that stood 2 feet tall, sturdier, more resistant to wind and rain. And because the plant spent less energy growing tall, it could put more energy into the grain itself. Yield per acre skyrocketed. This wasn't genetic modification in the modern sense. It was selective breeding, cross-pollinating plants with desirable traits until you got the result you wanted. It worked. It worked brilliantly. But here's what also happened. Wheat didn't just get shorter, it got genetically denser. Ancient wheat, einkorn, the kind humans first domesticated, has 14 chromosomes. Emmer, which came later, has 28. Modern bread wheat has 42. That's not a small difference. It's a fundamental restructuring of the plant's DNA. More chromosomes mean more proteins, more genetic complexity, and in wheat, that means more gluten. Gluten is what gives bread its structure. It's a network of proteins, primarily gliadin and glutenin, that trap air and make dough elastic. In traditional wheat, gluten was present but manageable. In modern wheat, it's amplified. And not just in quantity, in structure. Studies from the University of Agriculture in Faisalabad and other institutions have shown that modern wheat contains gluten proteins that provoke stronger immune responses than older varieties. Specifically, the gliadin proteins in modern wheat are harder to digest. They resist breakdown in the stomach and small intestine. When they reach the gut lining, the immune system treats them as foreign invaders. For most people, this doesn't cause immediate symptoms, but repeated exposure, day after day, meal after meal, can trigger low-grade inflammation. Over time, that inflammation contributes to autoimmune conditions, digestive disorders, and metabolic dysfunction. You're not imagining it. The wheat itself is different. Here's the irony. Borlaug wasn't trying to make wheat harder to digest. He was trying to make it easier to grow. The goal was noble, the methods were sound. But agricultural optimization and human digestion don't always align. When you breed for yield, disease resistance, and climate adaptability, you're selecting for traits that benefit the plant in the field, not traits that benefit the human gut. And because wheat is grown on such a massive scale, over 220 million hectares worldwide, there's enormous pressure to maximize output. Nutrition becomes secondary. Digestibility becomes an afterthought. The wheat that feeds the most people isn't necessarily the wheat that nourishes them best. Let's be clear, this wasn't malicious. Borlaug and the scientists who followed him were solving real problems: hunger, starvation, political instability caused by food scarcity. But biology doesn't care about intentions. Your digestive system evolved over millennia to process certain kinds of food. When that food changes faster than your biology can adapt, problems emerge. And wheat changed fast. By the 1980s, almost all modern wheat was descended from Borlaug's semi-dwarf lines. Traditional varieties were abandoned. Heirloom grains became niche products grown by hobbyists and small farms. The wheat your great-grandparents ate, tall, genetically simpler, lower in certain gluten proteins, essentially disappeared from the food supply. What replaced it was more productive, more profitable, more resistant to pests and weather. But it was also further from what the human gut recognizes as food. There's evidence for this. Small studies comparing einkorn and emmer to modern bread wheat show measurably lower immune and inflammatory responses. People who react to modern wheat often tolerate ancient grains without issue. It's not about gluten sensitivity as a blanket condition. It's about which gluten, which proteins, which structure. Modern wheat didn't just get bigger, it got biochemically different, and your body notices. So now we have two problems. The wheat itself has changed, genetically restructured for yield, not digestion. But that's only half the story, because even if we were still growing ancient wheat, we'd still have an issue. It's not just what we grow, it's what we do to it after harvest. The way we mill it, the way we process it, the way we turn green into flour and flour into bread. And that process, how we make wheat into food, might be even more important than the plant itself. But that's where things get really interesting. And that's what we're covering in part 2.
A fine loaf this is after the fields.
So here's what you need to understand so far. Medieval peasants ate 2 to 3 pounds of bread daily and stayed healthy. Not because they had superhuman genes, because the bread was different. The wheat was different. The milling was different. The ingredients were different. Everything changed, and your body is paying the price. In part 2, we're going deep into what happens during milling and fermentation, the steps that used to make bread digestible, and why skipping them is destroying your gut. We're talking about the chemistry of what modern bread does inside your body, and most importantly, we're covering what you can actually do about it. Because this isn't just a history lesson, it's actionable. If this is making you rethink everything you thought you knew about bread, hit subscribe. Part 2 drops soon. And drop a comment. Have you noticed a difference between real bread and supermarket bread? I want to hear your story. See you in part 2.